Well, Happy New Year to you, but alas, not only have I got too much cardboard at the beginning of 2026, forgot to put the recycling out, didn't I? I'd forgotten it was a Wednesday, but also I'm about to release a podcast about New Year's honours when some new New Year's honours have been announced. So please bear in mind that as you receive and listen to this, they do not take into account the honours that have just been announced as I release this into the wild. So I will not be referring to Dame Meera Syal, congratulations, although she is referred to herein because she's had other honours, nor will I be referring to Warwick Davis, OBE, regular Doctor Who actor Matt Lucas, OBE, or Bill Bailey, MBE. Congratulations to all of them, but when I recorded this, those honours had yet to be bestowed. Happy New Year, everyone. I hope you enjoy this. The honour is all mine. Welcome to Indefinable Magic. Chitter-chatter about certain aspects of a long-running television institution about spaceships and explosions, otherwise known as Doctor Who. Written and performed by me, Toby Haydock. This week, Alive, with honours. Oh, a very perfect, gentle night. Tom Baker, MBE. Rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? About time, say I, and other chronologically charged puns apposite to an icon from a TV programme with time travel at its core. Baker is the first Doctor to have been honoured in such a way, but am I being churlish? Of course I am. I'm a Doctor Who fan. When I think, would a knighthood have killed them? He is, though, I'm told, thrilled to be recognised, and what a lovely thing for a man in his later years to garland a life well lived, a career well wrought, and a godlike status well worn. Actually, it seems a bit small now. An earthly bauble, a mere pinprick on a creation of universal majesty like Tom Baker. But thinking back to when I was younger, the idea that anyone involved in the show might enter the ranks of the decorated seemed like a step too far to imagine. The RSC had all the sirs and dames, and of course there were actors from prestigious programmes who got the nod, whilst OBEs and the like were given to soap stars and entertainers who did a lot for charity. Good deeds karmically balancing the waywardness and loose morals that are associated with the second oldest profession, which on its own was rarely enough to garner a gong. And certainly not for someone from Doctor Who. Despite the fact that it was terribly important and everyone knew it, it was, to be fair, a bit of an also ran in that department, and one had to do some fairly nifty manoeuvres to associate with the very greatest. Oh, the Beatles were in it, we'd say, not mentioning that it was a clip. Or, oh look, there's a special appearance from Dolores Gray, despite none of us really knowing who she was. Or, yep, the Queen. No, not the real one. As good as we got was that a guest star had been in The Palaces, not Buckingham Palace. So for an actor associated with the show to have an honour, well, it seems like a sprinkle of some kind of stardust. And, of course, within the show, the Doctor himself has been knighted by the robot King John in The King's Demons, which must rule that out on a technicality, and Queen Victoria in Tooth and Claw, who immediately banishes him, so she gives with one sword and takes away with another, which just goes to show that this whole business of honours is very tricky indeed, as we will discover. Now, before we proceed, let me tell you, I have a stake in this, if only, as ever for me, run, Forrest, run, by virtue of lurking in the background, usually the most unremarkable presence at a remarkable event, populated by remarkable people. There were only 2 people involved in this particular event, oh, and a dog, and I suspect he'd beat me in the remarkable stakes. He certainly beats you in the tidying up stakes, says the other human portion of this anecdote. One morning, the post landed on the mat, and I went to get it, which is actually the dog's job, and he didn't do it that day, so who's barking now? Now, this letter had some sort of government stamp on it. The envelope was made of paper somewhat sexier than your average envelope, and it had the House of Commons logo embossed on it, and, well, I think I just immediately knew. We'd watched the launch of the Commonwealth Games a few months before, and it seemed to me that every single participant in the Paralympics had a decoration of sorts, a plethora of MBEs and OBEs and CBEs, more BEs, whether it be M, C or O, than there were legs, if I'm honest. Now, my partner is disabled, and whilst not an Olympian in the sporting sense, she's made real changes to her industry. Not just by turning up and being brilliant in Coronation Street on a regular basis for over a decade, after having been hired for initially just 6 weeks, but, well, because she's used her platform to get the industry to change the way it provides access for, and is mindful about the inclusion of, disabled talent. So whilst I do not begrudge any of those Olympians their awards, I kind of thought that maybe she should have one too. She didn't just achieve in her field, she ploughed it. She fertilised it. She probably thinks I should desist with this field metaphor right about now. And so, when I picked up that envelope, those thoughts resurfaced, and I was pretty certain that I knew it was something along those lines, and suddenly, there I was, no longer hitched to one of the great unwashed, but shacked up with a member of the Order of the British Empire. Now, I'm not especially establishment or royalist, but I found it very moving that a working-class woman from Morecambe, who'd had to battle her way through many, many people dismissing her because of her background and later her disability, was going to be hobnobbing with the great and the good at Buckingham Palace. She had no idea when I presented her with the letter what it might be, and was slightly baffled by the whole occasion, which tells you everything you need to know about why she does things and how little her head is turned by glitz and glamour. So, anyway, there's an MB in our house, and now there's one in the top-tier cast members of the Whonioverse too, with Tom Baker, thus far, the only leading actor whose antics have been acknowledged so. Although there is a rumour that Peter Capaldi has turned one down, but more of that sort of thing later. And yes, I know there is an actual doctor with an actual knighthood, Sir John Hurt, who was honoured less than 2 years after the Day of the Doctor, so his turn as the War Doctor could be what finally tipped this illustrious thesp status into that of the highest in the land. And by could be, I mean, of course, wasn't. But hey, it's nice to imagine that that might have been the case. But although, yes, he was strictly speaking a doctor, he wasn't an actor who played the leading role for a regular length of time, so Tom Baker is still allowed his uniqueness in the pantheon of leading Who actors, i.e. the star of the show, in regards to this kind of recognition. But this got me thinking about how many other garlanded officers of the realm have passed through the portals of Doctor Who, and whether you agree with the system or not is breathtakingly irrelevant. I mean, we can't even agree on who counts as a doctor in Doctor Who, can we? For the record, I'm very much in the you had to be the show's actual lead camp, and anyone else is a welcome guest star who counts as an other doctor. But, you know, you do you. But that's for another podcast anyway. We're dealing with honours, not doctors right now, as it's a fun way of dropping diverse trivia bombs, and the debris it throws up contains some unexpected dog tags. So, let's start at the very top. There are, unsurprisingly, fewer knights and dames in the alumni of Doctor Who than any other rank. Oh yes, plenty of actors have been knighted. The first was Sir Henry Irving, great man of the stage back in 1895, and it's an honour usually reserved for giants of the profession. Now, of course, there are plenty of dames in showbiz. Biggins, LaRue, Lily Savage, who has been in Doctor Who in her Paula Grady regeneration, but that kind of dame isn't the same. Although theatrical knight Sir Ian McKellen, who, if certain fans had their way, would be listed on Wikipedia as best known as the voice of the Great Intelligence on the Doctor Who episode The Snowmen, has recently trod the boards as a pantomime dame, and so has achieved the rare distinction of being both a knight and a dame at exactly the same time. But he was a knight before he was a dame, and his knighthood was nothing to do with his damehood, if you get my drift. And it's not a two-way street. Famous Shakespearean actors tend to get knighted. Famous panto dames tend not to. But yes, as with most things, the opportunities for women come a bit later, and indeed the same year they got the vote in the UK, 1918, was the first year a female member of the species was officially elevated to damehood by the ruler of the realm as opposed to the gods of Panto. The now barely remembered Dame May Whitty was the recipient. I was so hoping she turned out to be related to John Whitty, the computer voice from The Seeds of Death, as that would have been a lovely connection, but she isn't, and so it wasn't. But who've taken the knee and been tapped with the sword? Well, the earliest of those to be credited on the show was not an actor, but actually a musician. Richard Rodney Bennett only made one contribution to Doctor Who, the lovely fluting pastoral incidental score to the Aztecs, but he became one of this country's most celebrated composers and scorers of films, with Academy and BAFTA Award nominations to his name, and Murder on the Orient Express, Nicholas and Alexandra, and 4 Weddings and a Funeral on his CV. One suspects that the Aztecs was fairly low on the list of things they had done that prompted his being rewarded in 1998, but let's not go denying that story its honour, lest it leap from a temple top in protest. Bennett had already received a CBE in 1978, so maybe that was for the Aztecs, and his Oscar nominations and things kicked him up a level subsequently. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it, whether you call me a false goddess or not. And you can't change my story, not one single line. However, it must be pointed out that Bennett was not a knight when he worked on Doctor Who, and most people probably think that that sort of thing is very much a new series phenomenon, with Sir Derek Jacobi, knighted 1994, and the aforementioned Sir Ian McKellen, knighted 1991, contributing to the show well after they had taken their trips to Westminster. Not to mention Dame Diana Rigg, who is credited as such for her appearance in The Crimson Horror, even though that is actually a nominative faux pas. Although rumours about thesps like Sir Ben Kingsley expecting to be called Sir Ben abound. Now, that's his right, but I'm not sure it'd ever make me want to be his friend. But in terms of how titles actually work, Dame and Sir replace Mr., Mrs. or Miss. So whilst I might expect someone I don't know to call me Mr. Haydoke in a formal situation, but actually not really, I would not be credited on screen as Mr. Toby Haydoke, as that would look silly. But that's essentially what happens with Dame Diana's credit on the show. As for whether you should add an MBE or an OBE to your name in the credits, well, that seems to be a matter of personal preference. Most actors tend not to, but I noticed that the latest series of MasterChef is currently presented by a pair of MBEs, and so I shall leave that hanging about without comment, and without having to go back to see if I can fix it for any earlier TV personalities who did the same sort of thing. Anyway, we'll get to MBEs later. I would first like to introduce you to the very first Sir whose name appears on the credits of the show, and it is in a most unexpected place. And his name wasn't rendered with a Sir, even though he was one at the time, but the circumstances aren't quite the same here as with the other Sirs and Dames who crop up in this ramble. Although our illustrious VIP who fulfills this momentous place in the show's history does not have his honour as a nominative appellation on the roller caption of this episode, he had actually been a Sir since July 1963, when his father died. For, unlike the actors who are honoured for services to pretending to being someone else, our subject here inherited his title, being the son of a baronet. So on the 11th of December 1965, nestled in the credits for Episode 5 of the Daleks' Master Plan under the legend Special Photographic Transparencies, comes Sir George Pollock. Yep, Sir George Pollock, 5th Baronet, to give him his full title. But, and let's be fair, That's not quite the same as being a direct recipient of the New Year's or birthday honour system. But when there aren't that many sirs to choose from in the early years of the show, it seems only fair to grab our garlands where we can. But let's leave such variations here. I only allowed Pollock in because he was an actual sir. But other variations and landed gentry types, Time Lady Sarah Ward, for example, or Tracy Somerset, Duchess of Beaufort, that's cats off of Time Lash to you, must wait for another podcast to have their status, well, handed down to them. The Hartnell era is doing surprisingly well, though, isn't it? And, of course, there is someone from the very first episode who has an actual honour dispensed upon her later in life. An OBE, no less. And that's Verity Lambert herself, Doctor Who's first producer. A female pioneer in television, so a certainty for an honour at some point. She got hers in 2002, before Doctor Who had returned to our screens, so its presence on her list of achievements was unlikely to be a clincher. Not like today, when the mighty pair of showrunning OBEs Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat, 2008 and 2015 respectively, would, I think, be churlish to deny that Doctor Who is now such a phenomenon that being part of it will probably help you to clinch an honour without taking away from all your other TV achievements. But Lambert, like Davis, was an important televisual figure. But how about the first person to appear on screen in the show, to have enjoyed a cup of tea in posh china in an anteroom before a quick chat with the monarch and the bestowal of a medal? You won't be guessing this one, I am certain. Now, I read somewhere that the fine actor Ronald Pickup, whose first television role came in the annoyingly lost 4th episode of The Reign of Terror, turned down a CBE. But had Pickup picked up his deserved honour, he was a man modest to the point of nervousness, though, so I'm not surprised he was too humble for the hoopla. He would have been the earliest on-screen honoree of the Whonioverse. That's right. No accolade for Antidus, no title for Toxel, no decoration for Dione. Had Ronnie not been so self-effacing, he'd have only been the earliest such acting laureate in the show's history by one story, as that accolade actually goes to someone from the very next adventure, the otherwise almost pathologically unremarkable Planet of Giants. Because yes, ladies and gentlemen, the first MBE in the history of Doctor Who, for his brave stand against the capitalist perpetration of dangerous agricultural insecticide, is Mr. Farrow himself, the actor Frank Crawshaw. In 1980, 7 years after his final screen appearance, Crawshaw shared the Bucks Palace holding room with the likes of Cliff Richard and Royal Exchange Theatre director Michael Elliott, who was also behind Nigel Neal's The Year of the Sex Olympics on television, as they waited to collect their OBEs. Cliff for services to wholesomeness and singing, Elliott for services to theatre, and Frank, well, for services to standing up to unscrupulous insecticide peddlers. Well, maybe not, but he had dedicated his later years to administrating the Evelyn Norris Trust, which is dedicated to providing convalescence for actors and variety players who have been in serious ill health. So, unless someone gets Carol Ann Ford on the podium, Frank may well remain our earliest honoured on-screen talent, even if his modest contribution to a modest Doctor Who story would have made such a possibility seem, well, minuscule back in 1964. There aren't a huge amount of O's and C's and M's in the cast lists of Classic Who, but let's canter through them, because it's a profession with few rewards, so those received should be treasured. Rather appropriately, the show's first on-screen king, Richard the Lionheart, Julian Glover, received a CBE in 2013, only fitting for a man of his pedigree and one for whom royalty is clearly in the blood, if only in the Whonioverse. The following story provides a most unlikely environment for producing acting aristocracy, and yet deep beneath the fake fur, daubed makeup, and layers of embarrassment that are part and parcel of essaying a Menoptera is Captain Helio, Martin Jarvis, later to help the dinosaurs invade and to prevent too much vengeance being dispensed on Varos, who was awarded an OBE in the year 2000 for services to drama and, presumably, reassuring voiceovers. Do you count archive footage? I don't, but just in case you do and are the sort of person who writes in, let's head the Beatles off at the pass. They all got MBEs, but John Lennon returned his medal but remained an MBE, as it happens, in 1969 in protest at Britain's involvement in the Nigeria-Biafra conflict. Paul McCartney went on to be knighted in 1997. George Harrison turned down an OBE in 2000, and Ringo Starr became Sir Ringo in 2018. So the chase has 2 Knights of the Realm, if you really want to count the Fab Four, which I don't, because it's a clip snipped from something else. Someone who actually turned up to fight the Daleks and didn't rely on stock footage of herself was Jean Marsh as Space Security Agent Sarah Kingdom, later, in 2012, to receive an OBE for services to fratricide and being considered a companion without really being one. She too, of course, had been in The Crusade, also as royalty, meaning that story scores pretty highly, getting double honours for its cast. The Daleks' master plan nearly manages that same feat, as 2 of its actors, Buddy Windrush in the Christmas episode The Feast of Stephen, and Brian Moseley, who plays Malfa in episode 11, both received an OBE. Well, then surely that's a triple honour, I hear you cry. Nope, because Buddy Windrush and Brian Moseley are actually the same person. Oh, so it ties in with The Crusade with 2 honours then, I hear you cry, again, and so would politely ask you to stop crying when I'm trying to podcast. But no, again, Brian Moseley actually never received an OBE. Then why did you suggest that he did? I would have heard you cry had I not shot you when you opened your bloody gob. Well, many sources state that Brian Moseley received an OBE because those sources have confused him with his on-screen character, Alf Roberts from Coronation Street, who did, in the fictional world of Coronation Street, receive an OBE. And whilst many soap actors do get honoured, Erin Dawes included, in Moseley's case, fiction did not, alas, become reality. So Masterplan must be satisfied with just its 1 honour for Marsh. Whilst fighting the Daleks obviously brings you to the palace's attention, cyberfoes are not to be outdone either. Helping to see out William Hartnell's tenure and to sprinkle a bit of glamour onto it, retrospectively at least, was the mighty Bermudan actor Earl Cameron, who was awarded a CBE when he was 92 years old in 2009. In Doctor Who, he plays the astronaut Williams in The 10th Planet. And that's it for Hartnell, unless you want to count an honour from across the pond. English-born, but settled in Canada and therefore the recipient of a Canadian honour, the Order of Canada, in 2005, well, this gentleman dwarfs even the giant Frank Crawshaw, predating him in the show as the leg-flashing underpants prince of Marinus himself, Drippy Altos, a.k.a. acclaimed theatre director Robin Phillips, who made Canada his home and became one of its leading theatre directors. But I mention him only to discount him, as if there was a knighthood for services to sending in missives that begin, I think you'll find, in order to tell me something I found decades ago, thank you very much, then every single Doctor Who fan should have one. I knight you, Sir Pedant of Cyberspace, for services to pernicketyness. But even though it doesn't count really in what we're talking about, it's nice and incumbent upon us to mention the Order of Canada, if only to shine a light on something that perhaps isn't often talked about in Doctor Who circles. Anyway, onwards. And the Troughton era provides us with a huge figure in the acting profession, perennially and criminally overlooked by write-ups of its history. Marius Goring was a massive deal at the time he was cast as Theodore Maxtable in The Evil of the Daleks, so much so that he was actually paid more than Patrick Troughton to be in it. He shares top billing with Troughton in the publicity, and so was already pretty big news before he was awarded a CBE in 1991. This, however, does have a slightly political element to it that is worth mentioning because, These honours are things that come with complications and nuance and all sorts of different perspectives, which is what makes them interesting. His acting career alone might well have justified it, had the right people been paying attention, but there are many thesps of his stature who have remained undecorated by trinkets. One cannot help but think there was a political element to the awarding of this honour to Goring in 1991, when John Major's Conservative government was in power. Goring, once described to me by a fellow actor as right of Genghis Khan, put himself in great personal financial peril to make strong moves against his union equity, of which he was a founder member in the 1930s, so he had a committed stake in it. As a member of the council, he'd striven hard to stop it being controlled by the more left-wing contingent of the acolytes of Thespis. He felt that the union's boycotting of sales of British actors' products to apartheid-riven South Africa was politicising a profession that should remain neutral. His reasoning was that equity should not be political and deny its members royalties and opportunities when the policies of the South African government were down to them and not the cast of Howard's Way or a #1 tour of Dial M for Murder. South Africa at the time was a political hot potato and involved such things as rebel cricket tours as well, from sportsmen who had a similar ideology about their work as Goring did to his. But no one ever convened a Kerry Packer tour of And Then They Were None, although clearly at the time they could have even toured it by its original title in South Africa and no one would have batted an eyelid. But anyway, just in case you thought that actors being expected to boycott things was a recent phenomenon, ironically on the cricket front, Sir Geoffrey Boycott didn't boycott South Africa, which led to him being boycotted by his own national team, nominative determinism in action. Talking of which, and as part of my continued crusade to show that nuance is important, Goring risked his own money to take equity to court to ensure that decisions about political causes should only be taken after a referendum by all members, and he wanted to tour an all-black production of She Stooped to Conquer to South Africa in order to emphasise the inequalities of apartheid. He lost a lot of money in the court fights, but hopefully, unlike others, didn't have to sell his medal. Presumably, though, he did, at times, consider the irony of having played someone who wished to turn base metal into gold in some silly sci-fi show back in the 1960s. But nuance is important, isn't it? And these sorts of things are complicated. If you think the whole E's business is uncomfortable, and the E accompanying each MB, CB and OB stands for Empire, of course, well, then you could be forgiven, especially as Mr. Goring's political views definitely strayed into that kind of territory, a now very contentious one in terms of our colonial history. But latterly, the medals have been dispensed in a way that has attempted to redress that balance. Indeed, the earliest recorded Doctor Who Dame, the female equivalent of a knighthood, comes from the Troughton era, and so provides us with our first on-screen talent to achieve the ultimate title, and for sometimes doing what she had to do, not what she wanted to do, because that honour went to Carmen Munro, Faria from The Enemy of the World, this year. Yep, Doctor Who got an MBE, but a food taster got a damehood, which shows a certain egalitarian streak to the division of the honours in the Whonioverse, and hurrah for that. So the show's earliest dame, like the aforementioned Earl Cameron, is one of many performers of colour who have been recognised by this, in some critics' eyes, old-fashioned system, and, unlike the mighty poet Benjamin Zephaniah, who turned down an OBE because of its association with Empire, understandably rankled with him, well, these thesps demonstrate that actors whose heritage comes from a place where Empire might be a dirty word have been rightly embraced by the honours system in order to make it more diverse. In fact, the relatively small number of Gong recipients from Classic Who's roster includes the War Games' Rudolph Walker and Four to Doomsday's Burt Kwok, whilst 21st Century Who reflects that, while there's still work to do, both the show and the honour system are seeking to diversify their lineups, as Martha Jones's mum, Adjoa Ando, MBE, Martha Jones's sister, Gugu Mbatha Raw, MBE, what a family, Graham O'Brien's doomed wife, Sharon D. Clark, MBE, and Mickey Smith's grandma, Mona Hammond, OBE, will attest. Well, unless I'm wrong and it's got nothing to do with colour, and it just helps if, when you're in Doctor Who, you play a character related to one of the regulars. Oh, in that case, it's surely not too late to lobby for Dame Camille Coduri, is it? Go on, you know you want to. Anyway, it's not for me to form an opinion on their acceptance and Zephaniah's refusal, but I mention it simply to draw parallels and continue my campaign to be given an honour for services to bringing context and nuance to Doctor Who podcasts. These days, of course, the dames and knights of the theatrical world are especially busy and can pick and choose their acting work, so it's very clever of Doctor Who to gather a few of them up to make their contributions to the Whoniverse in a voice booth over the course of an hour or so, and not have to traipse to Cardiff or sit for hours in a make-up chair. We get someone illustrious, a knightly notch on the bedpost, and they can probably make their contribution down the line. Everyone is a winner. The voice-only contributions of the most garlanded members of the profession include Sir Ian McKellen as the voice of the intelligence in The Snowmen, and Dame Imelda Staunton in The Girl Who Waited. Although she would have to wait for her damehood, she didn't get it until 2024, well after her probably not instrumental in her getting it role as voice of interface. But, you know, it's good to future-proof, so well done, Doctor Who. Whilst Miriam Margolyes, MBE, Michael Sheen, OBE, and Alan Cumming, OBE, voiced Beep the Meep, House in the Doctor's Daughter, and Mr. Ring-a-Ding in Lux, respectively. So it seems to me if you have a good ISDN, you can bag yourself another set of initials fairly easily. Interestingly, though, as I perform this, Margolyes, whose name, to my unending amusement, always autocorrects to gargoyles, is the target of calls to have her stripped of her honour, another kind of witch hunter so prevalent today and not dissimilar to that witnessed by Cumming in his earlier Doctor Who appearance in the flesh in The Witchfinders. Interestingly, Cumming and Sheen haven't been stripped of theirs, but have instead committed honorary Harry Kiri instead, actually both undertaking the unusual manoeuvre of giving theirs back. Cumming, because he felt the word empire carried with it toxicity, whilst Sheen was uneasy that the title Prince of Wales has an association with the subjugation of proud son of Glendower Sheen's own nation. So what this means is, if you voice an alien and win a medal, then you'd better hide it, as they don't seem especially secure. I hope Nicholas Briggs has nailed down the massive haul he undoubtedly accrued on his school sports day. But talking of giving away, the aforementioned Ronald Pickup isn't the only person associated with Doctor Who to have turned down recognition from the palace. With huge irony, Honor Blackman turned down her namesake, demurring when offered a CBE in 2002 because she was a lifelong Republican. Not the American kind, but the more anti-royalist meaning of the word. Being no pussy, she also criticised her former James Bond co-star Sean Connery for accepting a knighthood but not paying taxes in the UK. No KBE without HMRC seems a fairly equitable moral stance. That said, you may think that Delta and the Bannermen's Ken Dodd was knighted for services to comedy and creative accountancy, but I couldn't possibly comment. Ironic that he should be in a Doctor Who story as someone manning a toll, though. Another comic who has excelled in his field and popped into the Whoniverse is John Cleese. The art lies in the fact that he was in City of Death, who turned down a CBE and later a life peerage, describing them, in a word appropriately oft invoked by his Monty Python cohort Graham Chapman, as silly. Leaping forward to the new series, Bill Nighy is a humble chap, isn't he? Not only is he uncredited for his turn in Vincent and the Doctor, sometimes no credit is cooler than an actual credit, and because this is Nighy we're talking about, on this occasion, it's pretty damn cool. And the only time in the show's history a guest actor has been uncredited down to coolness rather than error. But he also turned down an OBE, probably with a very cool, self-effacing waft that said, "Nah, not for me," in a very cool way. Now, before you go cool on me for my overuse of the word cool, let's take an unexpected turn and invoke someone not strictly speaking from Doctor Who, but who has also turned down an honour. Paul Dirac, whose anagrammaticized surname was juggled about to create Adric's moniker, declined a knighthood in 1953, reportedly in part due to his dislike of being addressed by his first name, but he probably also had an egalitarian objection to titles. Oh, the irony! If he had found himself terrorised by Cybermen and been unable to grab his own badge for mathematical excellence, there's gold in the knighthood medal, in order to dispatch his grating foe. Online sources suggest that actual Peter Capaldi, an actual Doctor Who, as well as Mark Gatiss, an actual Doctor Who pretty much everything else, writer and actor no less, but also a kind of doctor in that he was a Doctor Who night sketch doctor, as well as many other things. He's certainly not any old with an equity card, have both turned down OBEs. But that's the internet, so it might just be gossip for all I know. And often when an honour is turned down, the potential recipient doesn't want to make a fuss, as otherwise that'd be a bit like having your cake and eating it, or having your medal but not having to polish it, maybe. And so, actually, for all I know, the show's history is littered with people who've done the reverse of winning bullseye, by not drawing attention to what they could have won. Michael Sheard may well have been offered, say, a CBE for services to character acting, or perhaps there could have been a Dame Margot Hayhoe of TV Centre, or a Sir Matt Irvin of Explosions, if only those legends had not been so shy about wearing medals. So whether it's true about Peter Capaldi and Mark Gatiss, I don't know, and it would be rude to ask. But another spoof doctor, twice in fact, he was in a Victoria Wood sketch as well as The Curse of Fatal Death for comic relief, Jim Broadbent definitely turned down his honour in 2002, saying he didn't think it would suit him to be an OBE and that actors were already pretty well rewarded for their work. And, bless him, he said that his dad would have approved of him turning it down. Oh, well, thank goodness he did, you're thinking. It would have been pretty grim if the first Doctor ever to have received a title was actually a joke Doctor. That'd just be typical luck for the show. Well, listener, I'm afraid that the very first Doctor Who spoof, Dr. Fotheringtown, broadcast as part of It's a Square World as early in the show's history as December 1963, featured future Dad's Army actor Clive Dunn parodying William Hartnell. And Dunn received an OBE in 1975 for services to not panicking. And a later spoof Doctor, Lenny Henry, who did a pretty decent Doctor Who sketch in his self-monikered series in 1985, and who of course ultimately appeared in the show itself in Spyfall, was knighted in 2015. Oh no! So not only was the first Doctor to be titled a Mickey-taking one, but the first Doctor to be knighted was also one who played him in a bloody sketch. With Broadbent's fellow Curse of Fatal Death Doctors, the first, Rowan Atkinson, being a CBE, and the last, Joanna Lumley, being both OBE'd and then damed, and that spoof's master, Jonathan Pryce, now being a knight, we only need the Grants, Richard E. and Hugh, to get honoured, and neither is unlikely so to be, let's be honest, in order to get a full house from the Curse of Fatal Death, a spoof, and then we'll have final proof that you're more likely to get rewarded for taking the piss out of Doctor Who, however affectionately, than for being in it. Bloody typical, that. It's like Jonathan Pye getting honoured for services to journalism whilst Kate Adie gets overlooked. It also means that George Layton, technician Penn from the Space Pirates, but an estimable TV actor and writer, who played the Time Lord in a thankfully unbroadcast French and Saunders sketch, which managed to be worse than the thing it was spoofing, might just have his day at the palace yet. Now that French and Saunders sketch took place on a Trial of the Time Lord kind of set, and Honor Blackman's turning down of her namesake doesn't leave the actual Trial of a Time Lord entirely honour-free. For services to inquisiting, well, actually acting and being a much-loved gravy advert mum, Linda Bellingham got an OBE in 2014, the year that she sadly died of cancer. But she's not the only one we encountered during that 14-week epic to have been deemed worthy. Trial's other recipients of a garland I suppose, make it actually the most illustrious story in the show's history, but that depends if you count it as one single story or want to break it up into bits in order to give the other tales a fighting chance. Brian Blessed received an OBE for services to bellowing in 2016, but even if you do break Trial into chunks, then the segment before Blessed smashed his way into the Whoniverse is, surprisingly, a more garlanded and the most garlanded sub-story within this season. He may be a bit of a ne'er-do-well, you see, but Glitz's sidekick Dibber, aka actor Glenn Murphy, later to achieve stardom in TV's London Burning and to use his platform for charity work, received an MBE in 2007. And not just him. And hopefully this fella had a bit of a haircut when he went to get his, and maybe some dental work too, because none other than Broken Tooth, Queen Katrika's somewhat irrelevant sidekick who looks like a tramp cosplaying as a Tharrell in The Mysterious Planet, is, would you believe, also an MBE. 2 years before Linda Bellingham got her O, David, in 2012, got his M for services to broadcasting. He's also a revered DJ, you see, who's done much to promote Jamaican music in the UK. So, if you want an MBE, be a sidekick on Ravelox, I say. Talking of sidekicks, the second Doctor Who sidekick to receive an honour, or the first if you don't count Jean Marsh, again I'm leaving it to you to divvy up the points your own way as it's a complicated business, is Bonnie Langford, who got an OBE in 2015, which means that even taking the ubiquitous trial-wise Miss Bellingham out of the picture, every episode of The Trial of a Time Lord has an honour recipient in it. And with Linda, well, that total is at least 2. So take that, Michael Grade, CBE, who, despite it being quite common for controllers of BBC One so to be, has not been knighted. I mean, he is a life peer, though, so he did become, in time, Lord Grade. A couple of other Doctor Who stories have done exceptionally well when it comes to honours. Doctor Who and the Silurians has many virtues, but you wouldn't have thought it was a haven for contributors to the UK arts establishment, and yet Dr. Quinn, Fulton Mackay, Permanent Under-Secretary Masters, Geoffrey Palmer, and Saki white-coated factotum Travis, Ian Talbot, are all recipients of an OBE. Mackay was in contention for the role of the Fourth Doctor and beat the man who eventually took the part to an honour by a massive 41 years, for he received his in 1984. More proof that being an actual Doctor can be more of a curse than a blessing in royal circles. Maybe all that trespassing during his search for the Nemesis blotted the character's copybook and put him on some sort of royal blacklist. Leaving the Silurians behind and fast-forwarding to 1982 finds us in the thus far most regally approved classic Doctor Who story, even if a couple of its honorees are hanging around in the background, uncredited, so it's up to you which of them counts. For whilst Richard Todd OBE and Anna Wing MBE may look like they don't match the honourable Silurian triad of OBEs from that earlier Pertwee story, if you look behind them and have a peek at who's hanging around in the Kinder tribe, then you can see the aforementioned Glenn Murphy, who before his dibbering days did a bit of non-speaking, uncredited extra work in a loincloth. Another non-speaking tribes gonger found on Diva Loca, Graham Cole, a perennial 80s extra who made many appearances without a credit on the show, and who later became regular plod Tony Stamp in The Bill. Well, he, like Glenn Murphy, used his TV fame in order to help benefit charitable causes, and so was stamped with an OBE in 2010. And so it seems that there's a blissful irony in the Doctor Who story which has something to say about the British Empire and its colonialist ambitions, should be the one that contains the most recipients of the awards which invoke that complicated past. So, for those of you keeping score, we have The Trial of a Time Lord as a whole on 5, 3 OBEs and 2 MBEs, plus a bonus for an actress absenting herself from an honour. And do we count Bonnie Langford because she's a regular? maybe you just want to count her for a first story. Well, that's Trial of a Time Lord. But if you don't count it as one story, then, well, The Mysterious Planet has 3 and Mind Warp has 2. But 2 of those are the same person, Linda Bellingham, whilst Terror of the Vervoids and The Ultimate Foe both have 2 OBEs, both belonging to the same 2 people, Bellingham and Bonney. Kinder has 2 OBEs and 2 MBEs, but one of each of those is uncredited, and Doctor Who and the Silurians has 3 credited OBEs, none of whom are regulars, which is technically a higher honour than an MBE. So, look, it depends on your scoring system. Kinder still has a chance to go even further, I'd say, with actor Johnny Lee Miller, an uncredited child performer, now a bona fide Hollywood star, and Nerys Hughes, one of Wales' most successful actresses, still not out of the running either, I'd say. I mean, I'd give Simon Rouse one for his performance as Hindle alone, but that injustice is one of many sad side effects of me not being king. Sadly, Doctor Who and the Silurians has so few surviving contributors, its tally is unlikely to increase, but Trial could sneak someone else in if it's lucky. Nabil Shaban has been a pioneer for disability, for example. The battle is not over. That's all I'm saying. As those tribesmen of Diva Loca attest, humble contributions in terms of visibility on screen to Doctor Who have proved no barrier to making the journey to Buckingham Palace, as we have seen. Even less visible than Glenn Murphy and Graham Cole in Kinder is David Sulkin in Revenge of the Cybermen, in which he plays one of the non-speaking, hidden behind a mask and uncredited Vogons. Since then, he's become an English theatre and opera director, director of artist development at the National Opera Studio, and a committed contributor to arts-based charitable endeavours. As a result, he got a much-deserved OBE in 2014, Gold Standard Vogan, whose people probably contributed to the shiny stuff that went into his medals manufacture. They'll be pretty blasé about it on Voga, though, what with it being the planet of gold and all of that. His OBE, though, his glory. And here's a slightly anomalous one. Sri Lankan actor Albert Moses, famous as one of the stars of divisive sitcom Mind Your Language, and less famous as an extra in John Pertwee's Carnival of Monsters, was made a knight in the Order of St. John, a royal order of chivalry of the British Crown and a global humanitarian organisation. The honour is reviewed by the Priory Honours and Awards Committee before being submitted to the sovereign head of the order. That's currently the King. So it is a genuine knighthood, albeit one of a slightly different kind. And whilst your traditional knights, like those mentioned elsewhere herein, may be referred to as Sir, Albert would have been referred to as such only within the order, especially during formal events like investitures, and would not be permitted to use the title Sir outside of the order's context. Still, he's a kind of Sir, so it's kind of nice to mention it. It's all complicated, as I've said, and as you've no doubt gathered by now, but that's nothing compared to what is official within the canon of Doctor Who. And if Jean Marsh's Sarah Kingdom is in the grey areas between companion and guest actor, then Pauline Collins could claim to be too. She gets companion billing for some episodes of The Faceless Ones in the Radio Times. And, like Jean, she is also the recipient of an OBE, which also means that, like Julian Glover, playing a monarch, indeed playing a monarch who enacts a knighting in the programme of Doctor Who itself, can grab you a spot on the proper ledger, although Pauline was decorated 5 years before she played Queen Victoria in Tooth and Claw. Still, that means that with The Faceless Ones and Evil of the Daleks both having a medal holder, we have 2 consecutive Troughton stories to have a recognised guest star. And then we have the same occurrence the following season. For preceding the aforementioned Carmen Munro in The Enemy of the World, we have The Ice Warriors, which features Peter Sallis as Penley, who later received an OBE in 2007 for services to putting on the wrong trousers whilst drinking the last of the summer wine. Now, If we want to make that 3 in a row, then we can, if we want to add some behind-the-scenes talent, because Gareth Gwenlyn, who was assistant stage manager on The Web of Fear, having previously fulfilled that role on The Savages and The Underwater Menace, received an OBE in 2013 because, after his stint in Time and Space, he became a much-respected comedy producer and head of comedy at the BBC. 3 in a row! Well done, Season 5. If only there'd been any justice and they'd knighted John Abineri, then Fury from the Deep could have made it a quartet. In fact, the quartet could have stretched the other way were it not for the fact that Harold Pinter not only wasn't in The Abominable Snowmen, as many people have asserted over the years, but also, if he actually had been, if he hadn't turned down the knighthood that he was offered. I was going to say originally, by the way, that the Pauline Collins Marius Goring proximity created a 13-episode run of honorees, but of course neither of them is actually in the first episode of their respective story. Evil of the Daleks' opening instalment means there's a gap between their appearances. However, that episode does feature an actor who was married at the time to a future Doctor Who dame, for Alec Ross, who plays Bob Hall in Episode 1 of Evil of the Daleks and Episode 1 of Evil of the Daleks Alone, was the then husband of Sheila Hancock, herself decades off becoming Helen A. in the Happiness Patrol in 1988, 17 years after Ross's death, and half a century or so before she became Dame Sheila Hancock, as she did in 2021. She was actually already an OBE when she did Doctor Who. She'd become one in 1974, and she was promoted to CBE in 2011. Nearly a full house. Well, indeed, hers was a full house because her second husband, John Thaw, was also a CBE, although he sadly didn't live to see her get hers. If you think the Happiness Patrol is a slightly incongruous setting for one of the most decorated actresses to appear in Doctor Who, then may I present to you Paradise Towers, which, despite its unusualness, has an OBE in its ranks, and someone who was one before being cast in the show, and so providing some illustriousness at the time it was on. Nope, not Richard Briers, the chief caretaker. He was honoured later. He became an OBE in 1989 and was promoted to CBE in 2003. But cheery cannibal Resi Tilda, Brenda Bruce, who'd been to the palace in 1985 to have those 3 letters added to her name. And considering its relative brevity, the McCoy era does pretty well with honours, actually. With Ken Dodd being killed off in Episode 1 of Delta and the Bannermen, it's a good job that Garonwy turns up for the next 2 instalments to ensure that royal approval doesn't diminish before the story's conclusion, as the enigmatic beekeeper is played by actor Hugh Lloyd, who received an MBE in 2006 for services to both drama and charity. 2 years earlier, another Sylvester McCoy guest star got an OBE. Nicholas Parsons, of course, whose very good straight performance in The Curse of Fenric was a contrast to the light entertainment and comedy side that dominated a career that certainly deserved his decoration for services to drama and broadcasting, the latter mentioned no doubt because of his long stint as chairman of the radio series Just a Minute. 2025's honours list awarded Anne Reid a CBE, which brings that McCoy Classics tally to 2 and counting. Reid's much bigger role in Smith & Jones in the new series just goes to show that longevity in this business is not to be sniffed at. But never mind admired veterans like Lloyd, Hancock, Briers, Bruce, Parsons and Reid. Doctor Who spots future talent as well. Playing Captain Harker in The Claws of Axos and Marco in The Mask of Mandragora were certainly not major notches on actor Tim Pigott-Smith's bedpost, but he was always happy to talk about those roles early in a career that found him being hugely successful on stage and screen. Enough to earn him an OBE in the 2017 New Year's Honours, an award he received at the Palace just 1 month before his sudden death in April of that year. Young upstart Argelin Pangol, David Haig, has become one of our most admired actors since his appearance in The Leisure Hive, not something one could predict of most green-skinned aliens to swan about in 1980s Doctor Who, and he became an MBE in 2013, whilst Martin Clunes, at the very start of his career in Snake Dance, is now an established TV favourite and, since 2015, an OBE. The classic series' last producer, John Nathan Turner, in charge of both The Leisure Hive and Snake Dance, had, it seems, an aptitude for spotting future honorees. But he had his eye on the present ones as well, famously trying to tempt Sir Laurence Olivier, one of the greatest theatrical knights of all time, to play the mutant in Revelation of the Daleks, to no avail. To no one, except perhaps J&T's surprise. Chutzpah, thy name is showbiz. But it is, frankly, easier to get illustrious thesps into the more modern iteration of the show, I'd say, which has made digging around to find these jewels less fun, which is why my roll call of knights and dames and OB, MB and CBs from 2005 onwards is slightly breezier. It's also somewhat instructive, I'd venture, in regards to how much a part of the establishment, both showbiz and UK, the post-2005 incarnation is compared to the tolerated miscreant that was TV Who 63 to 89. Maybe the system itself has changed a bit too. The setting of Fear Her, Dame Kelly Holmes' Place, is named after an athlete, a brilliant one, Kelly Holmes, who was made a dame the year after her incredible double gold in the Olympics. But it seems to me honours are now bestowed as a kind of copy for already having won something else. In these days of instant gratification, honours are given out hot on the heels of a different achievement. All of the England cricket Ashes winners getting an MBE in 2005, for example, rather than, say, a lifetime of service, an accrued mass of estimation. It's the same with actors these days too, I think. Benedict Cumberbatch was made a CBE almost immediately after his Oscar nomination in 2014, which smacks of the system not really looking far beyond the obvious places. Surely his mum, Wanda Ventham, has chalked up a lengthy and impressive array of achievements within her field without having won a particular recognition here or a special gong there, which is the sort of thing that used to be recognised. And of course, if she had been honoured, that'd be a double whammy for the faceless ones. And 3 in a row for Time and the Rani, Paradise Towers and Delta and the Bannermen in the guest star stakes. Back in the day, an actor like Richard Pascoe would get an honour for an accumulation of years of fine performances and illustrious work, but without most people going, oh yeah, he's that guy that did that one particular thing. Nowadays, it seems, it's more likely to be a Benedict Cumberbatch or an Eddie Redmayne getting one for being honoured once they've been, essentially, honoured elsewhere. Less like services to drama, but more services to getting an Oscar nomination. It's like giving someone a gold medal for the act of winning a different kind of gold medal. It smacks of knocking off early in Honoursville. Shall we scour over the careers of various long-standing thesps who have accrued a mosaic of interesting works? Nah, just Google this year's Oscar nominations and look for Brits. That said, if they'd done that back in the day, then maybe, just maybe, John Ebenery would have got one because he was nominated for an Emmy for Last of the Mohicans, and that would have made Fury from the Deep 4th in 4. Ugh. Anyway, New Who, as it really shouldn't be called anymore, but it just goes to show that names don't necessarily literally mean the thing they're applied to, just in case the whole Empire thing is still rankling with you. Yes, New Who, I'm going to still call it New Who, has loads of people who are probably very used to the taste of cucumber sandwiches. Knights and dames galore, never mind McKellen and Jacobi. What about Knock Knock, who's there? Sir David Suchet, knighted 3 years after he appeared on the show in 2017, although he had been made a CBE prior to his turn as the landlord. The Idiot's Lanterns Dame Maureen Lipman is no longer hungry for deserved recognition, though she'd been made a CBE in 1999, also before her Doctor Who appearance. Hopefully, Dame Sian Phillips got closer to the monarch than 73 yards, or she'd never have had her medal pinned on her, both of which, her CBE and her damehood, came prior to her long overdue screen visit to the Whoniverse. And I hope that when Dame Penelope Wilton was presented for her 2016 investiture, the Queen said, "Yes, one knows who you are." She too had become OBE before she appeared in Doctor Who. In fact, dames like Penelope, with W's as their surname, are appropriately prevalent in a show whose initials are DW. Not only Wilton, who played a Prime Minister in Doctor Who, let's not forget, but Walter, who also played a Prime Minister in Doctor Who, Dame Harriet, off of Revolution of the Daleks. Well, she'd been a dame for 10 years before being exterminated, whilst Whitfield, Dame June, received her gong 7 years after she turned up to pinch the Doctor's bum in The End of Time. And there's one more DW in DW, and the most appropriate royal-flavoured surname, Windsor, as in Barbara. But Dame Barbara Windsor is kind of playing herself in Doctor Who. Well, she's playing herself playing one of her best-known characters, Peggy Mitchell, in Army of Ghosts. My head's spinning, I don't know about yours. But the modern show in particular is not averse to bestowing grandeur upon itself by having famous, decorated people playing themselves, like Dame Barbara did, sort of. Again, it's a sign that Doctor Who is as much of a badge of honour as, well, your actual badge of honour. And so we have Paul O'Grady, MBE, Lord Sugar, who at one time was Sir Alan Sugar, he's been knighted, Brian Cox, the science one, not the acting one, OBE when he was in Doctor Who, and he's been given a CBE since. So they're all amongst those who've been honoured in real life and bring those honours into the show itself. But not to be outdone, one of the few classic series appearing as themselves, though it's not explicitly stated that he is actually, but I'm going to say that he is. Ace gets his autograph. Courtney Pine has the double whammy of being awarded both an OBE and then a CBE. And all that jazz. This year's awarding of a knighthood to Sir Stephen Fry means that Spyfall becomes the unlikely holder of the only double knighthood in Doctor Who, with Sir Lenny Henry already honoured when those two noted comedians made for a nightly pair in the show's Series 12 premiere. They were just normal episodes, though, and it's the Christmas specials that have done very well, gathering illustrious thesps around the Yuletide table. So to add to Dame Penelope Wilton in The Christmas Invasion, we have Sir Michael Gambon in A Christmas Carol, Kylie Minogue, OBE, in Voyage of the Damned, joining her fellow anointee Geoffrey Palmer, OBE, Arabella Weir, MBE, in The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe, another bloody not quite Doctor, thanks to her title turn in the Big Finish alternative universe, and, well, and then we have The End of Time. A New Year's honour might just be for Christmas as well, as The End of Time Parts 1 and 2 feature the aforementioned June Whitfield, plus that story's villain, David Harewood. His 2012 MBE became an OBE in 2023. Claire Bloom, CBE, and of course, the one that took the longest time coming but was surely the most welcome, the OBE for Bernard Cribbins in 2011, which makes David Tennant's finale look pretty record-breaking in this regard. Then there's Brian Cox, the acting one, not the science one, who, like the science one, is a CBE, but unlike the science one, regrets accepting it, which he did in 2003, but he says that he would now turn down a knighthood. But all honours are equal here, so the point goes to The End of Time Part 1 for him, and add to that the cameo from John Barrowman in Part 2, and you have 5 honorees in each episode of this rating-smashing end of an era. 6 for the story as a whole. Then throw in the writer/showrunner, depending on how you score regulars, and you're at 7. And with Tennant, Tate, and Sim aboard, well, who knows how many more it might achieve. It may already have done so had Timothy Dalton not, apparently, been ambivalent about the honours system. I'm not going to say he spits on it, but the rumour is he too has turned one down. The End of Time is currently outperforming Smith & Jones, which has 2 MBEs, Gugu Mbatha Raw and Adjoa Ando, to add to Anne Reid's CBE, and, if you count the ubiquitous Russell T Davies, then the tally goes up to 4. Adjoa Ando is pretty handy to have on your team, actually, as she knocks the tally of New Earth up to 2, as she has an honour, as does Zoe Wanamaker. Cassandra made a CBE in 2001. And, of course, Adjoa Ando is also one of the many who swells the ranks of The Stolen Earth, along with semi-regulars Barrowman and Cribbins, a returning Wilton, and, appearing as himself, Paul O'Grady. And so there you have pretty much every type of honour and every type of performer covered in that episode's tally of 5. And you can all join in, 6 if you count Russell T Davies. Not to be outdone, non-Christmas special The Waters of Mars has Lindsay Duncan, made a CBE the same year she was in Doctor Who, and I absolutely believe it, but other new series honorees include Richard Wilson from The Empty Child and The Doctor Dances, who became an OBE in 1994, 5 years before his fellow Series 1 guest Simon Callow got a CBE in 1999. Demonstrating, what with Wilton and Wanamaker there too, how high the show was aiming guest star-wise upon its 2005 return. Olivia Colman was made a CBE in 2019 for being in everything, including The 11th Hour. Blink's standout star Carey Mulligan, another Oscar nominee, whose career has gone from strength to strength, got a CBE in 2025. The late Helen McCrory, guest star of Vampires of Venice, was awarded an OBE in 2017, and the Dream Lord himself, Toby Jones, wasn't dreaming when he got an OBE in 2021. And then, of course, there's James Corden and David Walliams, both Doctor Who actors, both awarded OBEs for services to acting, comedy, and probably dividing opinion. And if I have missed anyone, then apologies. This was never meant to be a definitive guide, so please don't write in. However, if you want a show to cross over with to give you the best chance of a Who-related honour, then may I point you in the direction of groundbreaking sketch show Goodness Gracious Me. The 11th Hour's Nina Wadia became an OBE in 2021. The Hungry Earth's Mira Sayal became an MBE in 1997 and a CBE in 2015, and Sanjeev Bhaskar from Death in Heaven got an OBE in 2005. The fact that the last two are married makes that house a very Who and honour-heavy household, and no mistake. In fact, between them, they've got MB, OB and CBE. Well done to the pair of them, although one has to feel for the fourth member of the Goodness Gracious Me quartet, the very talented actor Kulvinder Gier, who has received a call from neither the Palace nor the Doctor Who casting office. Hang in there, mate. It's a lottery, and to prove the honour system is about as fair as the acting profession itself, we should stop to acknowledge now the fact that Blake Seven had a regular with honour long before Doctor Who ever did, with Josette Simon getting her OBE in 2005, beating Jean Marsh, whether you count her or not, Bonnie Langford and Tom Baker by several years. So yes, I guess that in many ways it means nothing. It's dependent on so many different things, and people might have an indifference or even an objection to the institution. But that is outweighed for me by the recognition of the individual. I think this gift is more about the receiver than the giver, and yes, I'm sure we'd all be uneasy getting down on one knee in front of Prince Andrew these days. Yeah, all right, I know he's not allowed to give them out anymore, but I wanted to make that joke. Anyway, Shirley got hers from Princess Anne, who is kind of Doctor Who canon, actually, because she is mentioned in Tooth and Claw. Not very nicely, as it happens. Take note, the #BeKind Brigade. But she was absolutely fantastic, and oh, what a day that was. And I get that the wording of the award has its connotations. But surely it's not really about Empire. That name remains just for continuity. And it wouldn't be the same if the name changed now. It's a bit like Taggart. The name's the same, but perhaps its original central component has gone. And look, I suppose they could do a United Nations/Unified Intelligence Task Force type thing, make the Empire word disappear and, I don't know, change it for Order of the British Excellence or some such. But then you lose the grandeur of being associated with times gone by, and it behoves us to remember where we've come from, sometimes warts and all. And you know what? That day in our house, it was a thrill, a real thrill, that someone who works so hard for others, who's fought against adversity and who uses her time selflessly and is a cracking actress to boot, should get some sort of acknowledgement. And Doctor Who's got one now as well. So I say let 'em be. Though the fact that the magic space wizard of my childhood had to wait longer to get his MBE than the gobby northern cripple who's always nicking my charging wires means that there is something inherently wrong with the system. But hey, nobody's perfect. And it's proof, I think, of the show's perseverance and its continued ability to get the very best talents to contribute to it, that one day, I'm sure, we will most likely count an actual Sir amongst our actual Lords of Time. Arise, Sir Doctor. You've been listening to Indefinable Magic, Alive with Honours, which was written and presented by me, Toby Haydock. The music was specially composed by Dominic Glynn, and the artwork was by Dylan Patterson. Please support these podcasts by going to patreon.com/Toby Haydock and signing up for all sorts of goodies for as little as £3 per month. As you just heard, these podcasts are supported via Patreon, and I'm extremely grateful to those who hang around there, and they include DWFan91, Neil Tate, Nick Temple, Damien Timmer, Sabrina Tirabassi, Apollo C. Vermouth, Gary Wales, Adam Westwood, Stephen White, Tom White, Michael Williams, Rhys Williams, Andrew Willis, Andrew Wilson, David James Wilson, Sydney Wilson, Ruben Herfindahl, Stephen Moffat, Peter Burns, James Curray Smith, Peter Harness, Ronald Hayden, Rob Leonard, Christopher Meredith, Gavin McLean, Richard Straw, Nick Tedston, Tim Arding, Nigel Bromley, Paul Cook, Richard Chalk, Peter Chamberlain, Grant Davidson, John Deere, Chris Dunford-Kelk, Paul Dunn, El Pandras, Susie Ferguson, Jason Gorman, Paul Harris, Chris Hyam, Ian Key, Ashley Knight, Joe Llewellyn, Philip Marsh, Nathan Martin, Roland Moore, Rick Moran, Kevin Murdoch, Graham Knott, Adam Parker, Barry Platt, Risto Matti Cirillo, and Frank Shales. So, yes, to re-emphasise that, please, if you could, support these podcasts and their companions at patreon.com/Toby Haydock. For as little as £3 a month, you get advance releases, you get bonus material, you get monthly AMAs, you get behind-the-scenes looks at the various DVD and Blu-ray features that I'm involved in, interviews from my archives, and all sorts of other stuff. The tiers go up from £3, but everything is available at the lowest possible tier. It's very egalitarian like that. You can also make a contribution via ko-fi.com/Toby Haydock if you want to do without having to have all that monthly subscription malarkey. And there are ways of supporting this stuff without any financial outlay at all, including just listening, and I'm grateful. But if you could spread the word and, most importantly, like, subscribe, thumbs up where possible, 5-star ratings where possible, and a few lines of review. That's everywhere. YouTube, please subscribe to my channel there. Spotify, Apple, iTunes. Look, wherever you're listening to this now, those 5 stars, those few lines of review, they really do help to make this stuff more visible. And the more people can see it, the more likely people are to listen to it. So I'd really be grateful. Thank you so much. There are many places you can find me on social media. I'm at Toby Haydock and at Haydock Podcasts on Twitter. I'm at Toby.Haydock on Instagram. I have a Facebook page. and I have a YouTube channel. Again, subscriptions there really, really help. And you can also follow my comedy work. My Excess Malarkey Comedy Club is at Excess Malarkey on Blue Sky. Oh, I'd forgotten about Blue Sky. I'm on Blue Sky as well. Fortunately, I'm quite easy to find because of my name, so if you want to know what I'm up to on the various platforms, please, all that following and liking and subscribing is really, really helpful. Wow, that's a bit longer than I thought. I thought just go through the New Year's honours. It's quite interesting to say who was and who turned one down. That'll do you half an hour, Toby. Yeah, sorry that's a bit longer. Well, I'm going to try and have a couple of days off now, because as I record this, it's my other half's birthday very soon, and you can't ignore an MBE on her birthday, you know. Oh, I didn't mention that. Here's a nice piece of trivia. When you get the MBE, you get a piece of paper, you know, you get a certificate with a signature on it. And although Shirley was given her MBE presented to her by Princess Anne of Tooth and Claw, she was actually bestowed her MBE by the Queen. Queen Elizabeth II was still alive when Shirley's honour was confirmed and offered and all of that business. And so the signature on Shirley's certificate is actually that of Queen Elizabeth II, and she died not that long afterwards. So one of the last signatures from your actual Queen herself was put onto the bit of paper that has Shirley's certification of MBE-ness. So I got a signed picture of Michael Hordern through the post the day after he died, so that's pretty good. In fact, is that better than the Queen? If he'd been in Doctor Who, that would have definitely been better than the Queen. But he is still Sir Michael Hordern. He was still Michael Hordern. Amazing. And I'd written to him about something, and I wonder if his agent just had signed photos to send out, or whether Michael Hordern's last act was to send me a signed picture. Anyway, I have a signed picture of Michael Hordern. My MBE partner has a signed piece of paper from the Queen. You decide which one of us is the winner.